Good afternoon, everyone. Better. Thank you, and welcome to this book chart. I am honored to have with me my sister from Morocco, Leila, who we will be discussing her book, The Morse Account, which has been longlisted for the Man Booker. It has won, is it the Pulitzer? Okay, yes. It's actually on the final list for the Pulitzer. And then on my left side is Tendai Huchu, and we will be discussing his book, The Maestro, The Magistrate, and the Mathematician. And Tendai is, because my mom is Zimbabwean, I suppose he's my Sekuru, you know? So yeah, so I'm very delighted. I read this book last year already because Tendai was supposed to be here, but then he couldn't make it. So now I'm excited that I can finally put all that knowledge to, you know.
Am I forgiven?
I don't know. Let's talk about it over drinks. So we're going to start. I'm going to ask them to read each an excerpt from their books. And thereafter, I'm going to ask them a few questions. Yes. Interestingly, despite the fact that Leila's book is historical fiction and Tendai's is more contemporary, there are some overarching themes in both their books. So I am looking forward to having the discussion. Leila, please start.
Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Zukiswa, for your lovely introduction. It's really a thrill to be here in Nigeria at long last. I'm going to read an excerpt from the first, I don't want to say chapter. The book is organized in stories, not in chapters. But so the book is based on the true story of of the first African explorer of America. Who was a Moroccan slave. And so beyond that, it should be fairly self-explanatory. So this is in his voice. As I stood with my master outside one of the huts, I noticed a pile of fishing nets. It was while lifting one up to look at its peculiar threading that I found an odd little pebble. At first, it seemed to me that it was a weight, but the nets had smooth stone anchors, quite unlike this one, which was yellow and rough-edged. Then I thought it might be a child's toy, for it looked like it could be a part of a set of marbles, or that it could fit inside a rattle. It might have been left on these fishing nets by mistake. I held it up to the light to get a better look, but Senor Dorantes saw it. Estebanico, my master said. What did you find? Estebanico was the name the Castilians had given me when they bought me from Portuguese traders, a string of sounds whose foreignness still grated on my ears. When I fell into slavery, I was forced to give up not just my freedom, but also the name that my mother and father had chosen for me. A name is precious. It carries inside it a language, a history, a set of traditions, a particular way of looking at the world. Losing it meant losing my ties to all those things too. So I had never been able to shake the feeling that this Estebanico was a man conceived by the Castilians, quite different from the man I really was. My master snatched the pebble from my hand. What is this? He asked. It is nothing, senor. Nothing? Just a pebble. Let me see. He scratched at the pebble with a fingernail, revealing, under the layer of dirt, a brighter shade of yellow. He was an inquisitive man, my master, always asking questions about everything. Perhaps this was why he had decided to set aside the comfort of his stately home in Bihar del Castañar and make his fortune in an uncharted territory. I did not resent his curiosity about the new world, but I envied him the way he spoke about his hometown. It was always with the expectation of a glorious return. It is nothing, I said again. I am not so sure. It must be pirate, senor, but it might be gold. He turned the pebble around and around between his fingers, unsure what to do with it. Then, suddenly making up his mind, he ran up to Senor Narvaez, who was standing in the village square, waiting for his men to complete their search. Don Panfilo, my master called. Don Panfilo. I should describe the governor for you. The most striking thing about his face was the black patch over his right eye. It gave him a fearsome look, but it seemed to me his sunken cheeks and his small chin did not particularly reinforce it. On most days, even when there was no need for it, he wore a steel helmet adorned with ostrich feathers. Over his breastplate, a blue sash ran from his shoulder to his thigh and was tied with flourish over his hip. He looked like a man who had taken great pains with his appearance, yet he was also capable of the same coarseness as the lowliest of his soldiers. I had once seen him plug one nostril with a finger and send out a long string of snot shooting out of the other, all while discussing shipping supplies with one of his captains. Senor Narvaez received the pebble with greedy fingers. There was some more holding up to the light, some more scratching. "This is gold," he said solemnly. So then they find the gold, and then this next very short passage takes place after they've disembarked, claimed that territory for the Spanish crown, and declared to the natives that they are henceforth subjects of His Holy Imperial Majesty. My fears were confirmed early the next morning when we heard a commotion behind the village storehouse. Senor Dorantes had wanted me to give him a haircut, and I had just begun to trim the edges of his thick, wheat-colored hair. His beard had grown too, but he had not asked me to shave it. Perhaps he felt that he did not need to worry about matters of grooming now that he had reached the edge of the empire. Or he grew his beard because he could, and the Indians, it was rumored, could not. I confess I did not ask him why. I was relieved to have fewer chores. But when we heard the cries of soldiers, Senor Dorantes shot to his feet with the white linen cloth still tied around his neck and ran across the square to see what had happened. I followed him with civilian scissors still in my hand. The soldiers, it turned out, had found some Indians hiding in the bushes and had captured 4 of them. All 4 were men. All 4 were naked. I had seen Indians before on the islands of Cuba and La Española, where the Armada had stopped to purchase more supplies, but never at such close range. I was unused to seeing men walk about in their natural state, unashamed of their bodies, so my first impulse was to stare. They were tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of earth when it has rained. Their hair was glossy and long, and on their right arms and left legs they had tattoos in shapes I did not recognize. One of them had a lazy eye, just like my Uncle Omar, and he blinked in order to focus his gaze on his captors. Another was surveying the village, taking stock of all that had changed since our arrival. A large cross had been set up by the temple. The governor's standard hung from a pole in the square, and along the perimeter, horses were tethered to newly built posts. The stories I had heard about the Indians had me expecting something incredible, fire-breathing jinns, perhaps. But these men looked harmless to me, especially next to the Castilian soldiers. Still, they were tied up and brought to Senor Narvaez. From his pocket, the governor retrieved the pebble of gold I had found. Holding it up in his palm, he asked them about it. "Where did you find this gold?" The captives looked at him levelly, and 2 of them said something in their mother tongue. I could not detect a pattern yet to the stream of sounds that emerged from their lips. Where did one word end and another one begin? My upbringing in a trading town like Azamor had instilled in me a love of language, and if I may be forgiven for this moment of immodesty, a certain ease with it. So I was curious about the Indian's tongue, even though it had none of the clues that had been helpful to me when I learned new idioms. Familiar sounds, a few words in common, a similar intonation. But, to my surprise, the governor nodded slowly, as if he understood the Indians perfectly and even agreed with them. Still he repeated his question, "Where did you find this gold?" Behind him, the soldiers watched and waited. Up in the trees, birds were singing, determined in their trills despite the oppressive heat. The soothing sound of waves came from the beach nearby, and I could smell smoke in the air. Someone had already started a fire for the almuerzo. Again, the Indians answered the governor in the same way as before. At least I assumed they were answering. It was just as likely that they were asking the governor a question of their own, or challenging him to a fight, or threatening him with death if he did not release them. The governor listened politely to their answers, and then he turned to his page. "Lock them up in the storehouse," he said, "and bring me a whip." Senor Dorantes returned to his seat, and again I had to follow. Neither one of us spoke. I finished cutting his hair, handing him a small mirror and holding another one behind him. I saw both of our reflections on these opposing mirrors. My master looked satisfied with the haircut, nodding appreciatively as he turned his face this way and that. His beard nearly hid the scar on his right cheek, a scar I once heard him proudly tell one of his dinner guests he had sustained years earlier in Castile when he had helped put down a rebellion against the king. As for me, my bondage had taught me to keep an impassive face, but in the mirror, I noticed that my eyes betrayed my anxiety. I told myself that I had merely been curious about the kind of fishnets the Indians used. I had not been looking for gold. Yet the pebble I had found had caused these 4 men who had done me no harm, to be whipped. I had to pretend, like my master, not to hear the cries that had begun to emerge from the storehouse. Within moments, they had turned into howls, so long and so filled with pain that I felt they were echoing in the depths of my own soul. And then, interrupted by the periodic and terrifying crack of the whip, there was only silence.
Yeah, so I'm going to read from the Maestro section of my book. The Maestro is this one dude who is very troubled, and he's slowly losing his grasp on reality because he prefers reading books to actually engaging with the real world. So we're going to catch him in a scene. I'm sure that's something most of you guys can relate to. But we're going to catch him in a scene where he's actually reading another book. He reached out for the consolation of philosophy, which he was reading, and had been slowly, contemplatively for a week. This book, Boethius' masterpiece, written when he was in prison, was one of those favorite texts he returned to time and again, hoping with each reading to unlearn the last and discover it anew. Each time he read the poetry of the words, he felt a kinship, as though he too was in bondage, searching for a higher meaning to life through reason. The pages were dog-eared from when he'd lent the book to Tatiana. While he was careful and used a bookmark, she folded the pages as though forcing her presence onto them. He opened the window, swinging it wide, placed the book on the ledge and pulled himself up and twisted round so he sat onto it, looking into his flat, his back to the world. He could read easily with all the light coming from the street lights below. Page 38. Love governs lands and seas alike. Love orders too the heavens above. Boethius